So a rumor that's been going around for quite some time is that we are most likely going to get a reboot or a remake of the original Jet Set Radio game that came out back in 2000 sometime in the future. And this year is going to be the 25th anniversary of Jet Set Radio. And I don't think Jet Set Radio is a game that's really all that familiar to casuals because it was kind of like one of those. I wouldn't say it was a one hit wonder game, but it was one of those games that didn't get enough. Um, it didn't get enough like exposure. It didn't draw in casuals like all kinds of like big titles that came out during the early 2000s. And I think the reason for that was because it was a game that was pretty unique because it had like multiple genres that you don't really see in a particular game that's blended together. It was pretty much a platform action sports game. I think it originally came out for Dreamcast and then it was re-released for like the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 a little bit later down the line. But I believe Jet Set Radio did have a sequel in 2002 back on Xbox, the original Xbox console, and that's a game that no one really talks about all that much either. But I do feel like Jet Set Radio is pretty unique, and the game kind of felt like it was a bit ahead of its time when it first came out back in 2000s with the cell shaded graphics and all that other stuff. It was something that I feel like deserved more love and more attention, but unfortunately, the Dreamcast had not been out long enough for a lot of people to, I guess, really enjoy Jet Set Radio because Jet Set Radio came out in the summer of 2000, and I think the following year in in 2001, I believe, Sega had, dropped out of the console wars. So, I don't feel like Jet Set Radio as a franchise didn't I don't think it became as big as it could have been. And I do know that we had gotten like a remake or like a HD remake for Jet Set Radio back in 2012, but I feel like that was something that fell under the radar because it's something that a lot of people weren't really familiar with, and that genre of gaming wasn't really all that popular back in the early teens. But but yeah, I feel like Sega is trying to do something special with Jet Set Radio on its 25th anniversary. I'm not exactly sure, how they're going to go about promoting, a reboot or how they're going to go about reintroducing this game to the modern day audience of gamers because gamers are very picky and selective about what they want to see. They're more into action adventures and RPGs and stuff like that nowadays, opposed to platform action sports games or anything. And and yeah, Jet Set Radio was more of an arcade game than anything. And I feel like for the most part, you don't see too many arcade type video games like nowadays. And I do feel like Jet Set Radio is something that would add more variety to the gaming industry if Sega decided to reboot that IP. And and I believe that like Sega plans on rebooting multiple IPs, and I think that's why a bunch of games ended up being delisted this past year towards the latter half of 2024. I believe Sega had delisted like more than 60 games. Among them was Jet Set Radio, Crazy Taxi, and we all know why Crazy Taxi got delisted because I believe Sega's supposed to be rebooting the Crazy Taxi series, and they're also rebooting the Streets of Rage series as well. So we have a lot of reboots coming up in the future, and I believe I talked about in another video that Sega is supposed to be doing like this super game like project that's supposed to be starting up sometime in 2026, and it's something that Sega has not really provided like any clarity on or anything like that. But hopefully we'll learn more about it a little bit later this year. And as far as a potential Jet Set Radio reboot coming out this year is concerned, it's something that I feel would be really interesting. I know that when the series first started back in the year 2000, the sales were pretty low, but I feel like things are a little bit different. Sega is a more popular company than it was 25 years ago. And I feel like if Sega decides to reboot Jet Set Radio, if they modernize like the gameplay for the original game and they're able to successfully like market their game to a point where like casuals can get into it, then I feel like the game will do pretty well overall. But I don't know too many details about the reboot, and I heard rumors that we're supposed to get like news about the Jet Set Radio reboot a little bit later this year. Not so much about the game itself coming out this year, but like news about the reboot, coming out sometime in the future. And I think it would make more sense to released a reboot this year since 2025 marks the 25th anniversary of the game. But I don't know. They might hold off until next year or later on. I don't want them to try to reboot a game or a franchise that's been dead for so long and then they horribly, botch it or whatever. So if they do plan on relaunching the original Jet Set Radio and basically just like remaking it or whatever. I feel like Sega should definitely take their time on doing that. It shouldn't be rushed. The game should be polished, and they should do everything they can to make this game appealing to casuals if they can. Because right now they need their games to do well on a commercial level. Because I feel like for the most part, like Sega hasn't really changed all that much since the early 2000s or even the 90s for that matter, where Sonic the Hedgehog is like the main attraction, and all the other games are kind of just whatever. They can't reach the level of sales that the Sonic games did. I don't expect Jet Set Radio to sell nearly as much as like some of the older Sonic games or even some of the more recent Sonic games like Sonic Frontiers, but I do expect Jet Set Radio to be a big deal. Um, if Sega does like announce a reboot or a remake. And and I do feel like Sega is going to do everything in their power to make sure that this is a game that people are going to become emotionally invested in once they decide to actually release the game.